So good afternoon, all my students present for this session. We are continuing with the second unit of our journey in understanding the concept of international human resource management practices. So yesterday we had the basic understanding of international human resource management, what this international human resource management is all about. Like we have understood the different phases of an organization going from domestic level of territory to have its operations at its global level. We have also understood the different approaches that these organizations do take when going for international level of organizations, right? And today we are going to continue with the session with an understanding of this societal and cultural context in the human resource management practices at international level itself. So we'll have a depth understanding of this culture, and then we'll understand the impact that this culture do have on society of and how this is going to affect the business on the international level. That is. So understanding this culture, we need to have some basic assumptions. Like we understand culture as a common shared value, a common predisposition held among the members of a particular society, the members of a particular group or members of a particular country at large, right? So a common norm, value, belief that is held by the members of the society is what we call it as the culture of that particular society, right? But whenever we talk of this culture is more driven from the climatic conditions, the economic conditions of a particular geographical area, right? And based on the differences in terms of these climatic conditions or economic conditions, the culture of different geographical areas do vary from one another. This culture represents a traditional set of value systems, beliefs, right, that is shared in the society. Mostly, whenever we talk of this traditional beliefs, value systems, that is reflected in terms of the patterns of life, right? And this is what that passes on from generations to generations. So the pattern of life which enhances the kind of values and beliefs are driven from generations only. We to talk of the norms, the customs, the values, the arts, all of those are inherently adopted by the people from their societal aspects itself. That is what that defines the culture itself. Culture also, right, is represented in terms of the appreciable behavior in our society. What is accepted, what sort of norms or behavior is not accepted by a society is also what that determines the culture of the society. We are talking of this, culture which is more driven based on the kind of social interactions that we do have. One thing is that this culture is not inherently present within the individuals. These cultures can be learned. So these are learned predispositions, what we gradually acquire from different perspectives of life itself. But we need to understand culture as a subjective phenomenon. Reason being, the same phenomenon may be interpreted differently in different cultures. So, like this meaning of a particular symbol may change when we move across the cultures, right? So, different ideas, different value systems associated with the cultures are subjective, may vary from culture to culture. But somehow rather, we do say that this culture is not a static thing. This is dynamic in nature. So whenever we do come out with the basic changes in the environmental aspect, basic changes in the societal aspects, right? some of the old generation ideas are rejected and the new generation ideas are adopted, which ultimately brings a change in the cultural predispositions. With this insight, if we understand this culture, which is a common phenomenon, right? Let us talk of this from the perspectives of some of the authors who have defined it in a particular way. What it says that a socially mediated pattern of behavior, norms, beliefs, value systems of a particular community. So whatever the society accepts, whatever the society promotes, like may it be in terms of norms, value systems, beliefs, the kind of feelings or behavior, whatever it may be. That is what that is represented as culture. Culture represents the way people behave or believe, right, in a group, which they have developed over a period of time. That is what we call it as a culture. So the pattern of behavior that we do have, the pattern of thought process that we do have, has not yet developed over a period of, not yet developed overnight. So it is because of our association with different sort of cultural values itself. Okay. So the way people behave or believe is because of the culture itself. However, a comprehensive analysis of this term culture can be there, but it says that a cumulative, quasi-stable, crystallized, shared lifestyle of the people, which is reflected in terms of some of the preferences of their life over others. What we call it as the values. Values are the preferences of our lives that we share over other aspects. So these values are core to the individuals. These value systems are the inherent core of the individual. So it is there with the individual, and from maybe we can say that this is there from the birth itself. Right. So whenever we talk of these cultures comprising of value systems of the individuals, first thing. It says that in response to predispositions towards several significant issues and phenomena, attitude. Attitude is our favorableness or unfavorableness towards a particular object, event, or situation. Right. So, being a vegetarian or being a non-vegetarian was an attitude. That shows our preferences, right? Our predispositions towards certain significant phenomenon of our life. So culture comprising of the attitude of the people towards particular event, situation, or object itself. Right? And whenever we talk of this attitude of the people, these attitudes are organized, right, in a particular way to fulfill certain affairs of life, what we call it as the rituals. The way we celebrate different sort of aesthetic practices, like we talk of different celebrations like Dasaras, Kali Puja, Ganesh Chaturthi, right? All of those, the way we used to celebrate our birthdays in our life, this is the ritual that we do come out with. And we say there are plenty of such rituals which guides the behavior of ourselves. And in the way this promotes the desired behavior and eliminates the undesirable behavior, what we call it as sanctions. So our society always promotes certain desirable behavior within the people, what is admired. We always expect that people should come out with their desirable behavior and eliminate those undesirable behavior. Right. So the kind of ethical practices we do have, the kind of spiritual practices that we do have, that imposes certain sanctions, right? So maybe being a criminal, being a terrorist is not a desirable behavior, right? So that is some sort of sanctions are imposed on that. So whenever we to talk of this culture, we say this culture comprises of certain value systems, the attitude of the people. It is practiced in terms of certain rituals, and it is there because of the sanctions that is imposed on the people itself. Right? So with that, if I do talk of this basic characteristics of the culture, we say that this culture is a learned predisposition. Culture can be learned. So not like other personality traits where it's inherited. Culture is shaped with the learning experiences of the people itself. So whenever we to talk of modifying the behavior of the people at the place of work, yes, it is possible with proper learning like exercises. Right? People can be made to learn different cultures. Culture is a shared predisposition. Shared in a sense, we say that always people used to share it among their groups, organizations, right? Or even the society, right? So it's not about the individual predisposition. It's a shared predisposition. It's a common predisposition held by all the members in that group or organization or society, right? This culture is transgenerational, so it passes from one generation to the other. There are many such different ways. Like we used to have stories, we used to have rituals, we used to have local uh, you know ritual kind of thing, right? So all of those helps the culture to pass from one generation to the other. That is what we need to understand. Culture is represented in terms of certain symbols of our life, like the kind of swastik symbol we do have, kind of Om symbol we do have, or any such symbol you do talk of that represents the culture of a particular society. Culture is also represented in terms of certain behavioral patterns, right? So all of those behavioral patterns integrated through the process can be reflected in terms of the culture. And culture is adaptive, right? So it is always dependent on the kind of behavioral capacity that people do have, right? All of those things. So in a sense, if I do say that culture has three different labels, right? What to say? Culture begins with the basic assumptions. Right? Basic assumptions is these are the deeply held beliefs that guide the behavior of the members, right? So how to perceive a particular thing, how to think about a particular effect, or how to think about a particular action, all of those things will be there, right? So this is uh, the preconscious aspect of the culture. This is invisible, this is taken for granted. In a sense, we do say that each and every individual belonging to a particular society must have the societal values incorporated within him. That is what we say. It is assumed. But when people do develop more awareness towards different aspects of the culture, let's say we come out with the value systems, right? Value systems can be of two different, as I said, no, core value core to the inner self, right? So value systems we can have as the espoused value or enacted value. Espoused value say the members what they say about a particular object, event, or a situation, right? But enacted value says what the members actually do, the way the members actually behave in a particular situation. We call that as the enacted value system, right? So espoused value is what we preach, what we say. Enacted is what we actually do in an organization, right? So this transformation from espoused to enacted comes in when we do have more and more awareness about the cultural predispositions, right? But whenever we do talk of this culture, after having this awareness, this culture is always reflected in terms of certain artifacts, right? A symbol of the culture in the physical and social work environment itself. What it represents a particular culture, right? Like if you talk of now Ardhanarishwar, where we do have equal importance to Shiv and Parvati, means Indian culture is represented in terms of equity in male and female. That is what that represents, a particular culture, right? So culture is something which is visible in terms of certain symbols, certain aspects of life, but may not be decipherable. That is what we need to understand. Okay? But whenever we talk of this global perspectives, international perspectives, okay? So this culture brings in a diversity. As if we understand that diversity represents the people belonging to different geographical regions with different sort of fooding habits, clothing habits, dressing habits, and all those things. Right? Cultural diversity being taken as the people with all of those value systems included in the process. And if I do talk of this organizational practices, because of this globalization, when we say a diversified group of people nowadays, they come and work at the same workplace, it is very difficult to manage them. Reason being, now there may be differences in terms of the work styles of the people. There may be differences in terms of the communication. People belonging to different backgrounds may have different sort of stereotypes. Okay? And all of these processes are the processes which actually makes this cultural diversity more complex to manage, to handle with, to deal with. Okay? And we do say that organizations need to exhibit a sensitivity towards the culture, cultural sensitivity, right? So cultural sensitivity can be brought in three different ways. Three different ways. Like the first, the cultural predispositions related to the diversity is what that makes this process more important. Right? So let us understand these cultural dimensions from different managerial practices, right? So cultural perspectives from the different authors which has impacted the management theories, right? Let us talk of Hofstede, right? Hofstede's onion model of culture. Like we do have the core of an onion and then we do have layers of the onion. Here, the culture is represented in terms of four different aspects. There are certain symbols, there are heroes, there are rituals, and the values. Right? Whenever I do talk of these symbols, as I said, there may be certain words, there may be certain motions, pictures, or there are certain items which may have significant or extraordinary, right, aspects of life, which must be perceived by all those individuals. So, symbols represent the ultimate outcome of a particular culture that is being practiced by each and every member in the organization itself, right? We are talking of, whenever we talk of these heroes, actually, heroes are, the individuals, people, maybe living or dead, doesn't make a difference, right? Maybe genuine or maybe imagined, doesn't make a difference, right? But they do possess specific valuable qualities, right? And to say that these heroes are the people who stand as a role model to the others in the society. They do stand as role model to others, right? So it's all about the performance of these heroes in that particular culture. We do talk of rituals. Rituals are group activities. Doesn't necessarily is acquired to achieve the goal of the organization, right? But you know, rituals are something that is expected by each and every member of the organization or society belonging to the same culture. But whenever we talk of this culture, the core or the nucleus is the values. Right? Rituals, heroes, and symbols represent the practical aspects of these values itself. Right? So values are the core systems, and mostly these values are inherent. That is being present there in the child, maybe right from the birth itself. Right? So instead of thinking of those core aspects, we can modify the outer layers, right? The symbols, heroes, and the rituals that will ultimately have the impact on the core. Or in a reverse way, these core values will lead to rituals, will lead to heroes, will lead to symbols. So everything is correlated with, right? We to talk of one of the research of this Hofstede, where he has identified 6 such important dimensions of the culture. Yeah. We're talking of the power distance index, right? The individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance index, long-term versus short-term orientation, indulgence versus restraint orientation. Let's talk of this one way. Whenever we do talk of this power distance, right? When we do talk of this power distance, that is, that reflects the deliberate disparity in terms of the distribution of power in the society. This power distance index is reflected, right, in terms of the powerful and powerless people in a society itself. Say, if we do have high power distance index, where we do say that there is a high level of hierarchy, right? We say power is accumulated by few who are the top level organizational people itself. Right? Accumulated by few, right? So normally, whenever we do talk of this particular sort of culture, power distance index is high. You see, these kind of things are more confined to tall structure organizations, where the entire thrust is being given to the top level authorities. People do accept the leadership, they don't question the leaders. If the power distance index is high, they don't question the leaders, they just accept. Right? You can think of these Arabian countries, they do exhibit high power distance index. Contrary to that, when we do talk of this low power distance index, there you'll see that the power is dispersed, power is delegated, power is shared among the members. And you know, when I do talk of this structure of the organization, as I said, power distance high represents tall structure. The power distance low represents a flat structure. There is a frequent kind of communication, sharing of information. Right? So Austria kind of countries do have low power distance. Right? Individuality versus collectivity, individualism versus collectivism, right? So this is a particular factor that represents how these individuals to take the responsibility, or this is a factor that represents the individuals, dependencies, obligations. Right? So if I had to talk of high individualism, we can refer to the people of USA and UK. Okay? Individualism says they are, committed for themselves. They take the responsibility within themselves. They prefer to work alone to accomplish the goals of the organization. Collectivism is shared responsibilities. Right. So here, whenever I do talk of this collectivism, right, mostly you'll see that these Asian countries exhibit high collectivism. Right? Masculinity versus femininity. Femininity is certain characteristics based on the gender, right? Where masculinity represents a male characteristics, femininity represents a female characteristic. But that's not the objective. Let's understand this masculinity and femininity from the perspective of the organization where there is high masculinity. Right? Goals are defined, goals are accomplished, right? So, the thrust is the end goal of the organization. Countries like Japan, Hungary, these are the countries which represent high masculinity characteristics. But whenever we talk of low masculinity or high collectivism, right, femininity, then we do say, like, they are more dependent on the negotiations. They are more dependent on the kind of cooperation among themselves. So individual responsibility is no more being taken into consideration, right? A collective responsibility is there. So it's all about the responsibility of each and every individual member, right? So here we do say, like, countries like Sweden, Norway, these are the countries which exhibit this femininity characteristics, right? Uncertainty avoidance index. This deals with the kind of fear and explains how the society is tolerant to uncertain or ambiguous environment, right? And uncertain and ambiguous environment, like we are talking of, am I dependent on strict rules and regulations? If I'm dependent on strict rules and regulations, my avoidance index is high. I want to avoid right? So for each and everything, there are rules, regulations, laws, policies. Everyone will follow the same kind of rule just to avoid uncertainties. So you can think of German kind of countries are more uncertain avoidance than other places, right? But when I talk of this uncertainty avoidance index is low, that means what? People have openness. So there are no such strict rules and regulations which will guide the behavior of the people. People are open to the systems itself. Right? So if people are open to the system, they do have all the they do have all clarity in terms of their jobs, roles, responsibilities, everything. So where we see that German kind of countries are more or are high on this uncertainty avoidance index. UK, US are countries where they do have low uncertainty avoidance. Right? Long term, short term orientation. Long term orientation says we are concerned for the future outcome of the society. Okay. So if I want the society to grow in future, I must exhibit my loyalty, my belongingness, right, to the societal tree, right? So if I exhibit my belongingness to a social trait itself, so that will ensure that I continue with the same on a longer period of time. Right? We say like organizations like South Korea, Japan, China, they do exhibit long-term orientation. Short-term orientation says that is believing in accomplishment of immediate goals, right? So the low score represents a consistency approach, represented in terms of like the US, Ghana kind of countries' culture. Last is this indulgence versus restraint practices. Indulgence high means, so actually this indulgence and restraint practices represent to what extent our society is to achieve the individual goals and desires. Right? So whenever I talk of this individualistic approach, indulgence, individual's emotions and desires are fulfilled, right? But we have to talk of restraint practices. Individuals' desires are kept aside, right? So countries like Mexico, Venezuela, they do come out with high indulgence rate, and countries with Egypt kind of, they do come out with low on this indulgence list. The objective of this study is to ensure that different cultural perspectives are there, which we need to take into account on different aspects that will enable us to find out the differences in terms of different countries, and that will make us easy for carrying out our business. Okay? And from the managerial perspective, if this culture has to be understood, there's a model called the octopus model. Openness, confrontation, trust, authentic, proactive, autonomy, collaboration, experimentation. These are the 8 dimensions of these cultural perspectives from managerial viewpoint. Openness is openness to freedom, right? Freedom to communicate, freedom to share, freedom to interact without any kind of hesitation. So I don't have particular aspects imposed on the people. I don't have sanctions on the behavior of the people. I don't have rules and regulations to guide the behavior of people. They are open for all those aspects. The second aspect is confrontation, right? And whenever I do come out with any kind of challenges, or I do face any kind of challenges, problems in my life, whether I do keep it hidden within me or I do, boldly express that. If these problems are not being addressed properly, so that will not help the individual organization to move in the growth path. Okay? So, to what extent your culture is confronting you, that defines the level of company you work. Trust is building a sense of assurance, confidence on one another. To what extent, like, we can easily trust other people in our society. Most of the time, when we talk of these organizations, these trust issues lead to many such different sort of problems in the organizations. I said there has to be an understanding, there has to be an assurance, there has to be some sort of confidence. The process of delegation of authority, the process of decentralization, everything is based on this level of trust. If the higher authorities do not have a trust on the lower subordinates, these lower subordinates do not have a trust on the higher authorities, what will happen? Proper delegation of the work will not be there. That is. Fourth is authenticity. Authenticity is what one feels and says and does. There has to be a proper congruence. So if I say something and I do something, I express something else, it is not a congruating situation. So we want to develop cultures where everything should be systematic, right? And we do say that it is always expected in terms of expressions of the people. How do they feel, say, do the things. Fifth is proactive, taking initiatives of your own, pre-planning, taking prevention action plans. Not that the managers of the organization will only be responsible for that, but as a part of the organization's culture, we can also think of that. Autonomy, freedom to do the job at their own end, right? And giving that authority to plan and act at their own level. That's what we call it as autonomy. Collaborations makes it possible to help and accept others from a team, right? So there has to be proper cohesiveness among the members. Okay? And last one is experimentation, taking fresh looks, right? Fresh things. Always there is a demand for newer products, newer services. So if you don't, experiment with the things, perhaps achieving the solution will not be possible. So these are the 8 such important dimensions of culture, what we call it as octopus culture. But let's talk of one more author's contribution who studied this culture, right, from societal perspectives, from the perspective of a society, let's say. And they characterized under six such broad heads, right? And some subpoints are also there. But it says the nature, whether the culture is fatalistic or the culture is scientific. Fatalistic says the culture is more based on the orthodox practices, stories, rituals, traditions, all of those. But scientism is what based on the facts, based on the scientific aspects of the thing. So more of based on the real life aspects. Environment, second factor, where we do talk of structure. Structure is ambiguity tolerance versus ambiguity non-tolerance. Okay? To what extent the roles and responsibilities of the people are defined in a proper way. Okay? And to what extent there are ambiguous practices. Nothing is defined. Right? Based on that, the cultural values will decide. Okay? Sensitivity, high contextual, low contextual, concern. This is what that we will discuss maybe after 5 minutes. Okay? And concern is convergent versus divergent. Convergent is self-centered. Divergent is concern for outside. So, when this culture becomes a part of the society, whether it looks into the society or out of the society, that is what that has to be understood. Time zone, past, present, future. We refer to the past for our experiences. We live at the present and we plan for the future. In terms of collective approach, collectivist versus individualistic, right? And we do talk of norms in terms of other directed, inner directed, particularistic and universalistic. All of those things. Whether this linkage is role bound or identity bound. We're talking of this gender as androgynous or sexist. As I was telling you, India is androgynous. It will represent the Ardhanarishwar as a symbol of our culture. Tolerant in terms of distribution of power and types, whether it is expressive, conservative, assertive, expansion. All of those are the ways in which a particular society is classified for having a culture. So if we do make an analysis of Indian culture is fatalistic. Indian culture is context sensitive. Indian culture is tolerant of ambiguity. Right? Convergent. This self-centered and indifferent to outside human ecological environment, what we call it. Future-oriented, collective, other-directed, embedded, role-bound, androgynous, and the power distance tolerant. India is characterized with this sort of cultural values whenever we do talk of Indian society itself. Let's move to understand some other important, cultural researches and the way it has been interpreted. We'll talk of a globe model that represents global leadership and organizational behavior effectiveness. Globe model represents the different dimensions of the cultural predisposition. So it was like the research was conducted by considering many around 46,000 like managers around the globe, and many countries are being taken into consideration, right, for the research. The outcome of the research we'll discuss. Yes, right. And the basic dimensions are uncertainty avoidance, as we have already discussed these dimensions. Uncertainty avoidance represents the volatility in future. It is to avoid any kind of volatility in future. So let's have a particularistic approach, right? And we do talk of any such different kind of uncertain events are to be avoided. That is power distance. We have understood this is to expect and accept the unequal power distribution in our society. Right? So let us accept that if the difference is there. Okay. Institutional collectivism is there. Institutional collectivism, it says that how there is a collective distribution of the collective motion and sources itself. And we do talk of in-group collectivism, right? In-group collectivism is the kind of trust, faithfulness, pride, interrelatedness, all of these things are a part of the culture, right? Gender discrimination is there, and when we talk of this gender discrimination, there is differences in terms of the leadership, differences in terms of the position, right? Differences in terms of discriminations, or we do talk of separations. Right? Dealing with that will always represent the differences, and we need to manage that. We're talking of assertiveness, assertive behavior. So self-assertive is to what extent we are aware of the goals of the organization. We value these goals of the organization. Where other dimensions are like future orientation, right, and human orientation. Now, what this global leadership model, GLOBE model, represent is actually they studied the culture of different countries in these dimensions, and they clubbed these countries in terms of similarities in their cultural predispositions. Here is what that represents. Right? So they classified the different countries, they made this cluster of different countries where there are regional cultures, and more or less all of these countries do have similar sort of cultural predispositions. The regional cultures dominate. As we understood in our previous class, that whenever the organizations would like to move from domestic level of territory to the global organizations, so they need to move from domestic level to international, then to multinational, then to transnational, and then becomes a global organization. So passing from like domestic to international, there are cultural changes. From international to multinational, huge cultural change. Or becoming a transnational organization still is a challenge. So this helps us to understand how similarities are there in terms of culture, which will enable us to carry our business around the world. Starting from the top Middle East, you do see Turkey, Kuwait, Egypt, Morocco, Qatar, all of this. Confucian Asia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, South Korea, Japan. Southern Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Thailand, all of this. Latin Americans, Ecuador, El Salvador, Colombia, Bolivia, Brazil, Guatemala, all of those will come. Right? Nordic Europe, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, the Anglos, Canada, USA, Australia, Ireland, England, South Africa, all of those. Right? Germanic Europe, Austria, Netherlands, Switzerland, right? East Germany, West Germany, all of those things. Latin Europe, Israel, Italy, Switzerland, Spain, Portugal, France, Sub-Sahara Africans, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Zambia, Nigeria, South Africa, all of those. And Eastern Europe, Greece, Hungary, Albania, Slovenia, all of those. So the research enabled us to understand the similarities that people do have, similarities that cultures do have in terms of these countries. So whenever we do think of going beyond the level of domestic territory to international borders, let's understand it and the way we do come out with the differences. That's what. So this global leadership model helps us out in having a detailed understanding of the aspects that organizations do have. We do have one more model, this Trumpner's dimensions of culture model. This is in terms of 7 such aspects: universalism versus particular, individual in collectivism, neutral versus affective, specific versus diffuse, achievement versus ascriptions, the time sequential versus synchronizations, inner directed and outer directed. Right? So let's talk of these aspects, whether the countries like culture is represented in terms of the universalist approach or particularist approach. Universalist approaches, there are specific rules and regulations which will be applicable, without any kind of changes across the country. It's uniform throughout the country. Right? That is universalist approach. Particularistic approach is you cannot have rules and regulations equal for all the people. It has to be modified. So countries like US or UK, they believe in universalistic approach. Whereas if we to talk of countries like China, South Korea, they do believe in particularistic approach. Right? That is what we need to understand. Specific versus diffuse, if you to say. Specific says whether the public and the private life are closely linked or not. To what extent we create a mix in terms of our work life to our private life, our public life to our private life. Right? So US and UK kind of countries, they bring a clear segregation in terms of their public life and private life, their personal life to the societal life. But countries like Russia, China, India, we are more characterizing diffused state, less on specific things. Right? We used to keep mixing up the things, right? Our public, private, societal lives, everything is taken together. Achievement versus ascriptions. Achievement versus ascriptions, what it says. Whether a culture rewards according to one's performances or the culture rewards according to one's age, status, or gender. So performance-based reward system to seniority or merit-based reward system, right? That is what you need to understand. Countries like US, they believe this achievement culture. Individuals who perform should be rewarded, who don't perform should not. But if I to talk of these Asian countries believe more on ascriptions, that the senior people should be rewarded. People with experiences, expertise should be rewarded. There may be gender discriminations also on the basis of individualism versus collectivism, if we to talk of, right? Collectivism, if I'm talking of, so whether a particular culture focuses on the individual or on the group. When it comes to responsibilities, whether the individual is accountable for that or there has to be collective accountability. Whether the individual understands what is being expected out of him and he extends his abilities on that, or it's a group's responsibility. You will see that countries like US, they're more individualistic in nature. But whenever I do talk of countries like Asian countries, most of the Asian countries we talk of, they do believe in collectivism, collective approach. We are talking of this affective versus neutral, whether a person in a particular culture expresses its emotions openly or not. Affective culture says people express their emotions openly. Neutral culture says people suppress their emotions. Right? Now, if we do talk of this, now this countries like Italy or Spain, right? They are more affective. They can express their emotions in public, but in German, Sweden kind of thing, they don't express their emotions in public. So they are more neutral kind of thing. We are talking of sequential time versus synchronized time, right? So that represents whether people tend to do one thing at a time or they take up multiple responsibilities. Countries like US, where people prefer this sequencing of the events, so they prefer to keep one thing at a time. But if we to talk of France or Mexico kind of countries where people carry multiple responsibilities at the same time. Whether the culture is inner directed or outer directed, to what extent we do have a control over our environment or the environment controls us. That is what is the thing, right? In US, people are more inner directed, but most of the Asian countries will see that they are outer directed. They believe that environment controls them. So these are the different aspects of the organization's culture that we need to take into consideration. So let's understand with three different terminologies, right? So there can be cultural convergences, there can be cultural divergences, there can be cross vergences, right? Convergence says when two different cultures to mix with one another, some or other aspects of the organizational practices may be integrated. That is global integration. Divergence says we need to diversify our cultural predispositions to local issues, right? And sometimes we need to have a balance between this global integration and local responsiveness. That is what we call it as cross-vergence. So how these convergence, divergent and cross-vergence issues are being taken into consideration, that is what we'll discuss in our next session, right? With the other dimensions of international human resource management. So thank you very much. Let's end this session over here and have a great day. Thank you.